morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'd like to talk with you about Romanticism. So we are slowly moving out of the 18th century and into the 19th. And of course, Romanticism was a very broad movement which would encompass different areas of social and cultural life. It was like with any such movement, expressed through literary works, music, painting, philosophy, and basically even politics, as you will see in a little moment. And what is important for us during this course is, of course, mostly the impact of Romanticism on family life and private life, mostly in England, because then again it was a very broad phenomenon encompassing most, if not all, of Western culture. Uh, in a way, it developed as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, which, as you know, was quite discernible ever since the middle of the 18th century. By the end of the 18th century, the impact of the Industrial Revolution was visible in most people's daily lives, mostly through the phenomena of industrialization and urbanization, but also, especially later, growing secularization and growing consumerism. So, for some intellectuals, these things, especially industrialization and urbanization, were seen as mostly negative forces, and what they tried to do was to try and counteract them. Some historians of ideas say that the beginning of Romanticism could be attributed to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, so the French philosopher, French language philosopher, about whom we already talked a little with regard to his ideas on childhood and child rearing. Rousseau did not live to see the French Revolution, but many historians attribute the popularization of his ideas even to the outbreak of the French Revolution, and especially one of the central ideas of Romanticism, kind of all-encompassing ideas, namely the idea of freedom, of liberty. So, if you remember Rousseau's work, Emile, or on education, he believed that liberty should basically start within the family, and that children were creatures with natural understanding of freedom, creatures whose freedom should not be hampered, and basically that humanity should learn from its children rather than try and educate them. He took those ideas of freedom much further, so his writings started to be interpreted as a call for freedom also in the political sense. So the belief, the idea that everything, including the government and the power of the king, the power of the church, is basically a social construct. This is the beginning of the very prevalent idea that everything in society is cultural. Nothing is really beyond the social contract. So people started asking questions like, why should we obey the king? Why should we obey the aristocracy? Why should we obey the clergy? And within a few years, this led to the outbreak of the French Revolution. And this was really a turning point for European culture. Some historians, many historians of European culture agree that the 19th century starts with the outbreak of the French Revolution. Like, this is the last moment of the 18th century, and after that, even though chronologically this is still in the 18th century, 1789 is still in the 18th century, but culturally this is a different world. Why would it be different, and why would it connect it with the 19th century more than the 18th, is something that we are going to discuss at greater length with regard to the 19th century, and namely the dominant social class. Before the French Revolution, in the time of, to use a French expression, ancien régime, the old system, the old world, the dominant social class were the aristocracy and the gentry, basically the upper class, the landed classes, those who did not have to work. So those who could spend their time reading philosophers and enjoying social interactions and education and culture and the salons and all that. These were the people who dictated the cultural and philosophical tone to the epoch. They dictated the fashions, they dictated the morality. They were really behind all this fashion for the companionate marriage and for the new mother, and they were the readers of Rousseau. And as you might expect with any fashion, they got bored relatively quickly. So within a few years, ladies were writing to their friends about the family mania of some of their female acquaintances. So the fact that some ladies, like the Duchess of Devonshire, wanted to be very engaged, hands-on mothers. But for most of the rich, those who had the servants, those who had the money, the means, it was a passing phase. However, after the French Revolution, we have a new social class coming to the fore socially, namely the middle class. The middle class that started developing during the Industrial Revolution. These were the people who were enriched economically by the Industrial Revolution, and now after the French Revolution they were getting in France and in other countries. England followed the example of France to avoid their own version of a bloody revolution. So the middle class were getting political representation, and they were getting much more cultural resonance. So they would start to dominate through the areas which would require education, which would be socially resonant, such as the public opinion, the media, the press, the Church of England, also through the legislation in the House of Commons, which started to group rich middle class members. So the major difference between the upper class and the middle class, and something that will really change the tone between the late 18th and early 19th century, is that in the middle class, even if you were rich, you still had to work. So work, which has always been perceived by the aristocracy in a very biblical sense as a punishment for Adam and Eve for their sin, for the middle class, it was a necessity and it was a moral thing. Work starts to be elevated in the philosophy of the 19th century to a moral choice, to the means through which the soul is saved, basically. So we have very strong work ethics in the middle class, because they just didn't have the land, they didn't have the rent from the tenants, so they had to work somehow, even if it was a managerial kind of work. And the other aspect of middle class morality, which will very quickly develop into Victorian morality as we'll see later, is the family ethos. So, conservative moral division of labor between the sexes, so very strictly defined gender roles within the family and within the society, perceived as the expression of nature rather than the expression of culture. So political changes could be, after Rousseau, believed to be purely social and purely cultural. But the private life, and especially the division of labor within the family, was seen as the expression of nature. And nature is another very important aspect of Romanticism. We'll talk about it in a little moment. But to finish with Rousseau, the readers that proved to be most faithful and which proved to really change their life and change their family behavior were the middle class readers, because they didn't have the servants, they didn't have enough money, but with the new gender structure in the family, uh, developed the idea that companionate marriage is unattainable in everyday life, especially if you have to work. But a new aspirational model of the family started to form, namely the model in which the man would be the working partner, the breadwinner of the family, going out of the home into the world of commerce, of competition, and the woman, ideally a woman who could only stay at home and take care of the family, the servants, the children, and be spared the problem of working for money. This became the aspirational model with the clearly defined gender roles and division between the